Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest began doing intuitive readings out of his home in England in 2004 as a part-time healer. Now, based in California, he has built his company, Lee Harris Energy, into the multimedia, worldwide event company and production house it is today. Leading an 8-member international team, he is passionate about grounding creative spirituality into these challenging times. He is also determined to see people experience impactful and abundant lives while supporting each other through community. Leading a vibrant online community, he reaches over 100,000 people around the planet every month. His weekly energy updates broadcast on YouTube have received over 3.5 million views to date and offer practical guidance for navigating daily life with clarity, empowerment, and optimism. His acclaimed Soul Magic Retreats, Energy Mastery Retreats, and Energy Tune-Up seminars held around the globe are adventures into the deepest aspects of living, loving, and awakening. Welcome to the show, Lee Harris. What's up, Lee?
Hi, Matt. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. I was interesting because I was reading your bio and I stumbled on the number. I was like, is that 100,000 or is that a million? Either way, it was a lot of people, man. You're really getting the word out there.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? These things grow, and it's interesting hearing your bio read out because it's not something that you normally, think about. It sounds like a lot, but I feel like I need to lie down. But like everything, it all happens very slowly, one step, one brick at a time. So yeah, I'm really grateful to do the work I do.
Yeah, 100%. We were chatting a little bit before the show, just, a little bit new to your work and browsing it, and I just had an instant respect for how long you've been doing it. That's kind of what happens when you've been doing it over time. It starts to accumulate. You're really walking the path. You're following what your service is, and now it's starting to really amplify. And it's a very heart-centered mission, very heart-centered messages. I watched your December update. I thought it was really, really great, very informative. So do you just want to start with a little bit of background for those who might not know who you are and how you got here today, and then we can explore all the incredible things you're working on?
Yeah, so probably like all of your listeners and watchers, my spiritual path found me very strongly at a kind of key time in my life when I needed it desperately. So, I grew up in England. I have a very loving family, but as a kid, I was kind of tormented by stuff, and I now realize, in retrospect, I was very sensitive, very empathic, and very intuitive. But because I was born into, like most people, depending on their age, I guess, listening to this, I was born into circumstances where that stuff wasn't understood or talked about or overtly explored. I turned it on myself. So my thing really from a young age was I came wired for expression and creativity. And when I could be expressed and creative, I was good. And when I couldn't, I was in torture, really. That sounds dramatic. I now look back at how I was experiencing life, and I can see that kid was kind of tortured in those moments. So what happened was I developed compulsive eating as one of the ways to deal with the level of emotion I was feeling that I couldn't navigate in the world and that other people weren't talking about. So people come up and you say, oh, how are you? And they're like, yes, I'm fine, thanks. I'm really fine. And I would feel this distortion, but I didn't at that point understand I was feeling a distortion. It was like what people were saying was not matching up with what I was feeling was going on in the room. So I did the good old stuff yourself path of overeating. I was about 3 or 4 inches shorter than I am now when I was 15 and a half, and I was 60 pounds overweight. My mom took me to Weight Watchers age 10. So I always now look back on it and laugh because I was like not only the only guy, but I was 10 years old in a room full of women at Weight Watchers. And of course, at that age, you're a bit of a novelty. And I remember being in those rooms where women were talking about their emotions. And I thought, wow, my life really isn't that different because, I've always been super close to women, and I feel very male-female in myself. I have massive memories of being a woman in past life, so I always think of myself as kind of, in a way, I think I got led there for that reason, just to start communing with women who were talking about their feelings very early on. And also men too, but as we know, as guys, that was less welcomed. Certainly, I was born in 76, so I'm 41 now. I think the younger generation is far easier, but I think guys are beginning to be allowed to express themselves. So, long story short, theatre was my outlet. I could shapeshift into other people. I couldn't play myself because I had not much of a sense of identity really, and I certainly didn't have a sense of personal identity that I knew how to portray on a stage. That's a common thing for empaths. You often don't really know who you are. Other people might be able to describe you, but you're not really sure. But I was really good at shamanically shapeshifting into another person. So theatre was like my outlet all through my teens, and I went to drama school in England to complete that training. Was very on the fence about doing it, but really why I went to that course was it was just brilliantly holistic. I learned 5 rhythms there. We did really psychological mask work. There were some brilliantly shamanic teachers, and so during that 3 years, I completed my training, but was beginning to get really activated and woken up to my own intuition. And that really set me on a path of avidly going to as many self-growth workshops as I could in my early 20s, reading as many metaphysical books as I could, and having people tell me, oh, you're really intuitive, and kind of going, no, I don't know what you're talking about, kind of brushing it off and not understanding it. But then I had this pivotal experience where I heard the voice of my guides, and it was really clear. I'd heard of this thing called channeling. A friend had taken me to a channeler, and I sat there and studied him because, I'd not only acted, I'd also directed theatre. So I'm really good at seeing authentic performance. I can tell when someone's inhabited in their role, and I can tell when someone is showing us they're a character. And I was sat there with this guy, and I was thinking, well, why is he putting on this voice, and why has he got his eyes closed? There were lots of criticisms I had as to why he would choose to be doing this performance of channeling. What he was saying was quite wise, but I remember coming away and thinking, why doesn't he just... And I didn't really understand until it happened to me that when you channel and you hear your guides or you bring your guides through, it is quite different. And so I became a channeler privately, just for the people who knew that I could hear my guides. And I would either, at a certain point, I started to bring them through my own voice, but until then, I would repeat what I could hear in my head. So you and I would be sitting for coffee, and you would say, "Oh man, I'm having some real trouble with, my relationship right now," and I would just get donked on the head, because that used to happen to me all the time before I did this and owned this as part of who I was. And I would give you the message, and it would usually work for people. So, long story short, a friend said, you should do this for people, you should do readings. And that was 2004, and I said, no. And she said, oh, I'll send you out to my newsletter. And she did, and the rest was history. I did the first 60 readings in 60 days. And over time, 2 things happened. Number one, I got suddenly thrust into the channeling world, which I didn't even know existed. I certainly wasn't looking to be a channeler. I was embarrassed about it. I had very normal friends, and theatre friends and non-theatre friends. And, I think I didn't tell my family I was doing readings for about a year. Until it got to the point where it was almost hard to explain why I was working so much and running off to the room with the laptop. And I kind of got to the point where I was like, oh shit, I really need to own up to this now. But I was deeply uncomfortable about it and very worried about public reaction against me. I'd been the fat kid. I'd realized I wasn't heterosexual, that I was gay, or mostly gay, kind of at the age of 16, 17, and that was really inconvenient. So I was like, oh geez, not a third thing. Come on, give me a break. So it was weird. I was trying to be a musician. I was trying to be a singer-songwriter, and I was trying hard to make that career work. And then over on the right, this thing just happened around me, and the longer I was in the channeling world, 2 things happened. Number one, my own personal intuition just grew in confidence and in size. And number two, as much as I think channeling is incredibly powerful, like anything, it's not the whole picture. And so what I noticed in these workshops is there would be a group of people who would go to these workshops and use them really wisely, integrate the messages, add it to all the other things they were doing in their life, and they would have profound shifts. And then there would be other people who were just relying on channeling constantly. They weren't necessarily looking after themselves physically in the way that the channeling was advising them to. They weren't necessarily knowing how to apply this stuff to their lives. And I could see this gap, and it bothered me because I'd come from a self-growth background, where really I'm passionate about there's always more to us and we can uncover that. So I was like, okay, well, channeling does something to your frequency, it does something to your energy field, but for some people it's expanding them and lifting them out of their bodies. Then when they come back down to their bodies, they don't know how to alchemize it. So that was when I got really passionate about speaking about energetics and intuition and trying to the best of my ability, bring that down to as mainstream a language as I could. Obviously, when you're dealing with some of these terms and things, it's not like every single person in the world is ever going to relate to this stuff. Certainly the terms can be barriers, but to the best of my ability, I try and ground and be a bridge between the spiritual world and the human world, because I know for me personally, it's useless to me unless I can turn it into something in my life. I mean, it's one thing to be inspired and it's one thing to lift out of my energy field, and I've done that many times. But unless it's improving my life in a way that then allows me to help improve the lives of others, because my big truth, having worked with tens of thousands of people one-on-one and in workshops over the last 12 years, is when we open up to who we are here to be, we become benevolent to the planet. Now, for some people, they become super generous, and for other people, they become super generous in a very small, targeted way to their passion of organic gardening, and that in itself is going to ripple out to everybody else. So I think whenever we think of that generosity, we can get misled and think that has to look extrovert or far-reaching. I'm a big believer in, the grandmother who is raising that one child who is going to go into the world and do incredible things. That's her contribution. And then Oprah Winfrey, who is affecting gazillions of people around the planet, that's her contribution. But for me, it's always arguable as to which is better, because they're just different roles. Same vibration, same contribution, different scale, different set of circumstances. So that's really my passion now, that helping people alchemize this stuff and make what can seem conceptual or foreign relatable and useful.
Incredible. You touched on a lot of amazing things there, and it was nice to hear the background. And it's so common because, let's say for me, sharing to my friends who are unfamiliar with, let's say, channeling our psychic powers, and they think it's strange, right? And when you hear somebody who does it, I can really relate to that, because if I all of a sudden develop that ability, or somebody like Bashar, or it got really intense, even with doing this podcast, I guarantee you I would be extremely nervous about telling people, because people already think I'm weird. So you know what I mean? So I can totally see the process. And people get thrown in. It's not like, yeah, I'm going to do this and people are going to think I'm cool. It's like, oh no, this is happening. I got to figure this out, and people want me to tell you about it. So it's, I really love knowing the origin story, and I love how you're talking about bringing the worlds and bridging the gap. You have people can tend to want to look for something outside of themselves, have that as the thing, and it's really just guiding. We're getting information, but you have to integrate the work. That's the most important thing, and that's where you're going to get the results. So, at the beginning, we were talking about taking action, and I know that you have a new online course coming up, and so I was wondering if you want to talk about either the course coming up, taking action, or anything that I ranted about there, because I know I already have about 10 questions, so we can go any way. So I'll let you kind of take it where you want to.
I love it. And, it is true. I hear that a lot, what you've just said. There are even people I know in in this field who privately channel for themselves, and they're like, I'm not telling people that. They confide in me, and they're always like, "Oh, you're so fearless," and I'm like, "I'm not fearless at all. Trust me." It's like, you go through stuff with this. One thing that hits me about what you just said that really helped me. Oprah Winfrey interviewed Esther Hicks, and I did not know about Esther Hicks for about the first 8 years I was channeling. And I'd been channeling publicly for 4 years doing readings, but 2 years videos and audios. And she got introduced to me, and she really felt like home. It was the first channeler I'd seen that reminded me of my guides, who I refer to as the Z's, because they gave a bunch of names with different, all beginning with Z. So I just called them the Z's to group them together as easiest. And there was this interview with Esther and Oprah on the radio, and Oprah said, I've been a fan of Abraham and your work for over a decade, and it influences me. I use it daily. She said, I've got the books. She said, I can't have you on the TV show. She said, I can have you on the radio show. This was in 2008. She said, I can't have you on the TV show because the mainstream isn't ready for it yet. She said, I know they will be, but I can't do it yet. And that was like almost 10 years ago. So I get it. And I think the reason I'm careful about how much, there's two things I'm careful about and that I monitor. I'm not just a channeler. I'm not just like Esther. She is just a channeler. So every video you see of her, you know what you're getting. I'm very mindful of how much video footage there is of me out there channeling, only because I don't want my face and voice to get hijacked visually for people when I'm also somebody who is an energy teacher. So I'm very conscious of that, and my team know that, and we do things very particularly around that. So if you engage with the work in a deeper way, there is audio of the channeling. Obviously, I channel live at events as well. So it's interesting, when Gaia TV called and Regina Meredith wanted me to go on that show, definitely that was like, oh, okay, I love Regina, so I'll do anything for Regina. But definitely whenever I go on her show, it's a different level of exposure. So I think what you said about channeling holds true. The action piece for me, I mean, I don't think anybody listening to this is devoid of awareness of how intense things have become. Now, if you've been tracking prophecies and if you've been tracking intuitive information about this period that we're in, it's no surprise to the mind. However, it's a big bloody surprise to the body sometimes. I mean, me too. It's like actually living through this experience is something else, and it's something that we all have to calibrate to. So the one thing that I've been talking about a lot in the last 2 years is, yes, we're becoming more multidimensional, and we often hear that word and make it esoteric, but the truth is we're becoming multidimensional in all ways, meaning on any given day you're surfing between multiple extremes. The Harvey Weinstein stuff that came out, and all of the sexual predator issue that has been coming out and really like rising to the surface, the PTSD, the victimhood, all of those emotions that have been silenced in people for so long now coming up to the surface. I'm living in Malibu, and it's heartbreaking. We've had people evacuating from their homes because of these wildfires 30 minutes from us. We had bags packed by the door and the cat box ready to go, a few days ago. We've put it away now, but who knows, we might have to pick it up again. These extremes that are going on the planet in so many different ways, it's like, how much can you handle on a daily basis? So for me, what I've really been called to be a messenger of, and the Z's have been saying this a lot, the biggest thing they've been saying is, you are needed and now is the time. So I'm a big believer in, if you're somebody who feels like you're here to make a difference on the planet, or you're a soul-led person, or there are different terms people identify with. Some people identify with the idea of being a light worker. And of course, like any identification, we have to be mindful of the shadow side of that. Some light workers can egoically go off on that and separate themselves from the rest of the world, and that can be unhelpful. But these terms tend to be directional points for people. And so the light workers, or the people who feel like they're here for this transition, they're here for this change, There are some of you that will be on the floor or going, oh, Jesus, this is really intense, and I just need to lie down. And I'm always like, great, lie down. If you feel like you need to lie down, lie down. Oh, but Lee, I can't lie down because there's so many things needed. And look at this new news story. And my friend, and I'm like, yeah, and you're not going to be any good to anybody until you lie down for a moment. Sometimes we learn that if we lie down for 10 minutes, 10 minutes is enough. But if we never lie down and we keep avoiding lying down for 2 months because we think that we should be doing stuff, we get burnout. And then we're lying down for 2 months. And I'm a big believer in honor the feelings that are coming up, because all of us are going through this emotional flush in response to whether it's the Weinstein stuff, whether it's the fires, whether it's what's going on politically. There's a multitude of things to keep us occupied right now vibrationally. But for me, the big lesson that's been coming for me from the Z's and that I'm really aligning with is hold your vibration, and recognize when your vibration is taken off. Recognize when your energy is hijacked. Recognize when you are hijacking your own energy because of an old pattern that you've had for 20 years that used to work that now doesn't. So to me, these times are really on, like in terms of our awareness being heightened, in terms of our energy being heightened. The call is to action. So you have to honor where you feel inactive, and then slowly, as you look after yourself and support your emotional field as it is going through its response to everything happening on the planet, you then start to settle again, and your nervous system starts to go, oh great, you're not trying to kill me. You're actually going to look after me during these crazy times, and you're also going to give me the moments to be quiet. Okay, great. I'm calm now. Now you can go and talk to Matt about what he needs to talk to you about and be useful for 10 minutes. And being useful is a big thing for me. I used to hear my mom say that a lot, and so I know I've got that in my programming. But there's nothing nicer for me than being useful, actually. And of course, the shadow side of that is you have to make sure that you aren't living on that, or that you can also experience what is it like to just sit there in your garden for a week. And I certainly did some periods of inertness in 2016. But for now, how useful can you be to people and the planet? And surrendering your idea of what that may have looked like, which I think is what on a world level is the shockwave that has been going around the last few years. It's like, oh, I didn't think it would look like this. Well, it does. So take as long as you need to cry, to grieve, to feel overwhelmed, to feel exhausted. Honor all of those feelings because they will pass if you truly honor them. And then you'll get back up on your feet and you'll go, oh, okay, there's some shit to do down here. Let's get cracking, you know? And so I feel really quite lit up about that truth. And I feel really lit up about helping other people do that. One of the big things for me is giving others like yourself or myself the courage and the tools to trust that they're needed in whatever way they think they're needed, whether they think they need to do a podcast 3 times a day that's all about this one area topic and they're nervous about doing it. I'm like, hell, go for it. Great. Let's work through all the problems. Let's work through the resistances. I can save you some time because I've been through pretty much all of them in the 14 years I've been doing this work. But we're needed. And that really feels like the biggest thing I've been called to be a messenger of this past year. And I feel that really is going to be the work I'm serving in the next 2 to 3 year period. I really want to be there for those who are needed and help them do their work in the world. That feels really important to me.
Amazing. Awesome, man. Well, you touched on a lot of great points there. I feel for me personally, going through my journey and say, just kind of looking at the world and how I could support it for a long time, there's so much, let's say, wrong with it. And then, you know, I'll look at all the war and all the problems and I'll think on one hand, oh, there's so much here to fix, and I'll put the world on my shoulders. And then sometimes I'll hear a great, you know, speaker or philosopher, and they'll say something along the lines of, why do you think there's anything wrong with the world? There's nothing wrong with it. It's your perception of the world. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's the case. And where I've kind of come from is a little bit of what you're touching on, is it's balance, where I can't put the world on my shoulders and I can contribute. and I can contribute in the way that I feel I want to contribute. So when you mentioned the woman who does the garden and that's for her fulfilled and that's her thing and that's her contribution, maybe she inspires other people to eat clean vegetables. She's eating clean vegetables. She's connecting with the earth. Nobody's saying that you got to be Oprah. You need to be yourself. And so because we're getting such a catalyst on the planet, and from everything that I've read on the prophecies and things like that, whether Barbara Marciniak is a channel, she is, bringers of the dawn. I feel like I'm from the Pleiadian star system. That feels good to me. Maybe not. I don't freaking know. But I've read and I resonate with it, and I've had these experiences that are out of body, that are beyond mine. And when I look at all of these prophecies saying the same thing, looking at the world and how much has changed, and the big change among many is access to the internet. When I was talking to my friend Ian the other day, shout out Ian, he's the man. We're always talking about guests in the podcast, and our parents didn't have access to the internet. So we can check something now, and then we can learn, and then we can have a conversation where maybe that's kind of how things are working, where we had the battle before. It's one way versus another way, but you can't fact check. Well, now we have this opportunity to let all of this darkness come to the surface, go through it in our own way, alchemize it in our own way, go through our own process with honesty and integrity. And then once you're feeling solid, right, if you need to lie down, I like that you said that, because sometimes I'll get so overwhelmed with all the things I'm doing, I'll literally just lie down with my face, and I'm just like, just leave me here for like a bit, and I'll get up and move forward. So I think that you're touching on really important things, and I guess I'd ask, because we're talking on big level subjects. How do you feel for somebody viewing the world now to like, well, how do you feel the world's going to be shifting? Do you feel like when they say ascension, the way that I see the ascension going is a lot of crap coming to the top, because this Harvey Weinstein, from my research, is the tip of the iceberg. We're going to explore.
And I only name him
see,
because he's, totally.
Yeah, it's going to get, the horrific stuff on this planet is just so dark, and we have to see it and go through. And this is going to be a process. So for me, it's a very individual process of kind of learning to swim in this higher reality as we're kind of getting out of this trudge. And then from that will be beauty, love, support, and collaboration. And I was just wondering if you have any insights of how you feel if the things are going to play out, and how one can navigate these changing energies. And, it's if anything, we're getting rapid change, and that's going to continue.
Yeah. I won't claim to know, because I don't have an end line vision. I've never been given a vision like that, and even if I was, I don't know if I would ever publicly put it out there, because I don't always think those things are helpful. Sometimes they are, but what I do feel very strongly, I think you summed it up beautifully, actually. The one thing that the Z's have been saying a lot is that the 2018 to 2024 period is pivotal and huge. They've been saying that for a while, for a few years, and we're now right on it. And I don't think anybody could look at the last year or two on the planet and disagree. Oh, wow, this is very different. So for me, I feel like we're right now in the heart of everything that a lot of us have been waiting for. And I say that with some hesitation, because I don't mean that with any disrespect to anybody who right now, is going through suffering because of that. Because as we all know, suffering is a very dark place to be in, and it's born of the darker energies on this planet that we've all come through. So what comes to mind for me is there are multiple timelines always, and the one thing that the Z's told me about 6 months ago in some private channeling I was doing, which they then shared publicly in a similar way at an event I was doing, was they said, you guys have no idea how many negative timelines have already been averted. And when I heard that, that really kind of shook in my body, because here's where I think it's difficult. And you named this brilliantly. You talked about, well, doesn't look good, and if I'm in that part of my mind, it looks really jacked up, and then I go over here and I'm in trust and love. That's what I meant about we're multidimensional, and yet we've all been trained to be linear. So I've learned for myself that until I learn to honor all of the voices in my head, which might be different, and to not let any of them be in the lead if they come up for an hour, but instead to go, oh, that's interesting, Lee. You're looking at this fire thing and feeling terrible about it, and you're in emotion about it for what's going on for people very close to you. And then an hour later, I'm like, okay, what can we do? How can we support? How can we help? They're two different parts of me. They're connected and they're part of a continuum. But I think we get into this idea of, well, I should think this or I should think this. And the internet's a gift, and we're taking in more information and stimulation than we've ever done biologically. The Z's once said, there is nothing in your codes, in your body, in your DNA, that it's not that we weren't ready to process this, because we were, but there's no history. So there are certain histories that we replay, like, Matt, you're having an argument with a friend. You're like, oh yeah, wow, I had a really bad argument in the 14th century with this other friend. So I have that in my body. I know what an argument's like now. It's happening over text and email. Back then, it was a hammer to the face, Because I think the thing I always try and remember is how bad things were. Like, it's easy for us to forget. When you go back into history, it was barbaric at times. So for me, as much as I can be objective and step back, when I have a reaction, I honor the reaction, I let the reaction pass through my body, and I try not to act on it in my mind. Of course, I'm human, I don't always succeed, but I know that's what I have to try and adopt. I know that's the place to kind of, as much as I can, hold my focus. I think my instinct about it as we sit here is, I do feel for all the people who are a bit under the wave right now, because I've certainly been under the wave at various points myself in the last 6 years. But it feels to me like 20% of the people tuning in on this podcast are probably right now under the wave and super emotional and really unsure how the hell to deal with all of this stimulation. And the one thing I always say to any of you who that feels like your truth, you can figure this out. If you're somebody who is regularly overwhelmed, then you need to figure out what you're missing around balance, around boundary, and around strength. So Matt, you and I were talking about martial arts. One of the things I've recommended for years to any of the people I've worked with who are highly empathic and highly sensitive is I've said, go and do some self-defense training, go and do martial arts. And usually they're horrified. But I explain why I'm doing it. I know for myself, when I weightlift, my feminine and very sensitive side feels a bit safer inside my body and is not as responsive or reactive, because there is a part of me that physically is a bit more capable and a bit stronger, and it gives me a balance. If you're somebody who feels unsafe in the world, if you feel overly sensitive, if you feel vulnerable to everything, going and training in self-defense or martial arts is going to physically and energetically reactivate the warrior in you, because I don't believe anybody is here by mistake, but I do believe that we all have certain gifts and certain challenges that we have to learn to master, and none of us escape that. You look at Oprah, who she's a great example because she's very public. She's what we would call quote unquote successful. She's on her path. She's serving millions, and she's going, you know what? I struggle with the weight. I struggle with this. I think the old school self-growth spirituality used to edit out the struggle bit and go, oh, it's all great. You can get here. You can reach here. But there is a real diversity on this planet. And so I feel like as we go through the next 10 years, there is an opportunity to de-align with the suffering and the darkness that we personally have imbibed on our own journeys, and to start to become part of the solution on the light and the love side, while also lying down every now and then because you're just horrified because something that you're seeing in the news totally takes you back to when you were 22 and you had that huge argument with your dad, and either you feel like your dad was too hard on you, or you're suddenly mortified because you're like, oh my God, I wish I had more awareness back then. I was really mean to him and I thought I was right. So I think it goes both ways for all of us. I know for myself, there are There are several times I've wished I could go back in time and talk to certain people and go, God, I wish I'd had more skill then. I wish I'd been able to handle that better because I could handle it better now. But then I have to go, you know what? It's a continuum. We're all learning. We're all doing our best. And I think this next 10 years, if you feel like you're sinking, that 20% that I spoke to you, my message is figure it out now. Spend the next 12 months, write an intention that says, in the next 12 months, I will clear this depression. I will feel purposeful, and you write that if you're feeling unpurposeful. And if you're feeling chronically lonely, I will find community. One of the biggest myths I hear from light workers over and over again is, oh, I'm isolated, I'm alone. Now, that can be true for periods of our time, but I see too many people using that as an excuse or a barrier and not actually doing the investigative work to go, why aren't I manifesting community? Why do I think that the person that I need as a friend has to know about the Pleiades? Because my big thing about people is I don't care what spiritual knowledge you've got. If you're an open person and you're in your heart, I'm in. That doesn't always follow with spiritual people, because I've met many spiritual people who are very metaphysical, very concept based, but they've got a lot of stuff going on in their personality that makes it hard to truly connect with them. So for me, spirituality is not the important thing for my tribe. It's, can I connect with them? And if I can't connect with them, is there something in the way from their side? Or is there something in me that they're teaching me? I'm like, oh, wow, Lee, that was a bit defensive. Why did that person make you feel defensive? Let's just reflect on that for a moment tomorrow or today, and see if I can just loosen that. Sorry, that was very round the houses, Matt, but that was what came out my mouth. So
Perfect. I loved it. It was great, man. Yeah, I think that what you said was really beautiful, and there was a lot of great points in there. And okay, so it brought up a lot. And the first thing I'll talk about is the most personal, would be the martial arts thing. I think that for me, growing up as a martial artist and mastering that external form, the masculine, has given me that courage and armor to say very feminine things. You know, if you've read my Instagram and you go through any of those posts, it's all about love and kindness and community. And if I wasn't confident in my shell, if I wasn't confident in my being, I don't think that I would have the courage to do that. And, you know, because in the masculine side of it, right, because I definitely have a very strong masculine warrior type. You know, I'll grab you by the neck and end you if you're doing something terrible, right? Like, I will do that. And I have that through every part of my being, even more than the feminine side. And it's like, well, if you're going to, I don't know, talk crap about me on Instagram and say I'm a wuss for writing something about love or whatever, it's like, buddy, come here. Say that to my face, you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to do it. You know, I'm a bearded, martial artist, but it talks about rounding it, right? If you're really feminine, there's some benefits from getting masculine energy. If you're going around and you're masculine, it's always like hiding something, I find, you know, and from growing up a man, a lot of the, you know, men, like you said, your generation, we're about 10 years apart, and there's a big gap in those 10 years on the freedom to express an emotion. Right. And so, you know, I think that probably a lot of my friends are like, wow, he talks about his feelings a lot. And my mom, you know, luckily was very loving. And it's a really great point to build up that strength and to build up that balance within yourself is very powerful. And another few concepts that you really talked about were, you know, honoring life when we're seeing this duality, right? And the timeline splits and it's all bad, right? Every time we look, ever since they could give us that little tube of television, it's always been bad. Duck and cover, duck and cover. You know, have you ever seen those 1960s or 50s where they were doing propaganda for one of the wars, and the commercials are so overt and so terrible. And if you imagine just living your daily life on a farm, you've never had a TV or a newspaper, everything's always fine. Everything is always fine, you know, barring farm problems. But then this little tube comes in, the television, and now it's telling you that it's not fine. And that's how these things are created. It's almost like an entity attaching to you. It's a thought idea. It's a thought form that is damaging. And so it's very critical where you get your information. If you consistently watch the news and you think it's true, it is damaging because you keep thinking about the same thing all the time. And so what I've been kind of coming to grips with a few of the podcasts and everything, it's that I'm only going to experience everything from my point of view, and same with every other person on the planet. That's all you're going to get, and that's going to be your reality. 99% of all the stuff that you're experiencing outside as a possibility is not going to happen. What will most likely happen is the stuff that you create from within yourself will manifest in your outer world. And so all of that stuff that we're supposed to feel bad for and the world is terrible, we're actually co-creating that. And so we can pick something that we're passionate about and serve it. Not to say it doesn't exist, but it's the dwelling that can really cause the problem. So I think that it's just important for me having a Unity Grace on a few podcasts ago, and just accepting all as self. All is me, all is creation, all is perfect. This dirty part of me is not me. No, that's me too. And I'll sum it up with, I was editing a podcast today, and I do a meditation kind of thing as I edit them. And I always say you're whole, harmonious, balanced, perfect, just as you are. And then I'm just like, and then I say something about, oh, well, accept yourself as imperfect. And I was like, oh, wait, like those are different. But it is the same. It's like I always say it's like a kid riding a bike. If you're 5 years old, you're not going to know how to ride the bike. You're going to fall. And through life, we're just going to continuously make mistakes. And all of that is a part of us. And all of that is okay. And all of that is perfect. And all of reality in this existence is perfect and is the one source. So that's my rant that I wanted to just hand back to you. I do have a question, but if you want to add on to that,
I love it.
I felt like I got out what I wanted to get out.
Your rants don't sound like rants. They're very loving. And I wanted to say something to you, which is, I've done a lot of interviews over the years, and you and I have never met before. But I feel super comfortable with you, and I notice that in my body, and that's not always the way. And so to me, that's testament. My body is my barometer. My body tells me a lot about the energy exchange I'm having with somebody. And yet you have this lovely, I think, the strength of holding that you have, partly because you're doing your mission and you really believe in what you're bringing to people through this show. So it makes it a pleasure to be your guest for one of them, but also that masculine that you were talking about that you have. But within that, you have this massive kind of heart and receiving ability and peace energy, which is really beautiful to be on the other side of. So, yeah, I'm glad you didn't grow up in England 10 years before, because England also has its own thing about repression and expression. But I just wanted to say that, because I was thinking that when you were speaking. And as to your meditation, what I love about what you bring up about, well, if I say, if one part of it's you're perfect just as you are, and then another part's accept that you're imperfect. I use words a lot. Words are part of my medicine and my magic, I guess. And it took me years to figure that out. And but they are, and yet words can be so slow and so clunky compared to just pure energy transmission. But I understand that I'm a word weaver to help people get there. So with what you just said, how I see it is, when you gave that mantra, you are perfect and whole just as you are, there's a really beautiful frequency on that. When you give the line, accept yourself as imperfect, it's a much more closed, lower energy frequency that line has, but it's key. Because as we start to go, oh yeah, I'm whole and I'm perfect just as I am, we cannot help but hear this other voice, whether we hear it as words or whether it's just an energy imprint. Well, I don't know if you are, because that model on the front of that magazine has a six-pack. And, there's all of this societal conditioning about what's right, what's wrong, what's success, what isn't, what's loving. So we're trying to get back to the perfection of that first line of yours, but it does mean we have to acknowledge and work with all the other supports that we might need to get there. Like, you need to hear, accept you're imperfect, because there's a part of your brain going, I'm not perfect. And again, I'm not saying we all hear it in words, because most of us don't, but it's in the energy field, it's in the culture, it's in the ancestry. So for us to take all of that armor off and get back to the center is kind of why I think that other sentence is so important.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that clarity. I really enjoyed it. And I really like what the last thing you said about taking the armor off, because on the big picture side of things, or the way I see the world going, that is the true courage of how we need to move forward in this. This has to be a peaceful revolution on the planet. And,
Mhm.
you know, Gandhi did it, and we can. That's like essentially the ego, is that armor. We have this idea of who we are, and we're protecting that, and it doesn't really care if we harm someone. And if you can let that go, and you can be fully vulnerable and authentic, it doesn't mean you're weak, and it doesn't mean that people step over you. It just means that you're comfortable with how things come in, because you're ultimately allowing the external force to let you feel some way. So that's your own business,
Mhm.
and so you can alchemize that, and you can train them. And as a society, when we can move towards this harmony and this peace and this acceptance of something else, and then open up and just let that go. Let the armor come down, hug your brother and sister. I was going to do a video on the power of giving a proper hug. And as a society as a whole, if we were just normally giving hugs, if that was the standard, that alone would be such a beautiful upgrade. And that's something that I would love to see in my lifetime. And I guess where I had an interesting question for you, because Jim Carrey's been coming up a lot, and I did a little bit of a video around, because I'm getting a lot of different perspectives from where people are. They'll share what they think about Jim Carrey. Some think he's just straight out nuts. Some think
Mhm.
he's his spiritual ascended master now, right? And my perception, and what I shared, was that creating the roles, he's a brilliant case study in the ego. And what he shares in his documentary is, as you step into another human being, and you think like them, and you believe like them, and you act like them, and you fully immerse, and you forget the identity of Matt or Lee or whoever. You forget that identity, and you need to become Matt. Well, you need to think how I think, believe what I believe, identify with martial arts and sports and consciousness, and you know pursuing whatever stupid crap I think about, and you fully immerse. And if you can do that, you're going to leave yourself behind. So then, who is yourself? And so, as a theater major, I was just wondering if you could give your perception on how you feel he's expressing that, and what you think that overall message is.
I love it. I love that you're bringing this up because I watch television very selectively. There are a few things I like to watch, and a lot that I can't watch for more than 5 minutes. And I love that documentary with Jim Carrey, which myself and my partner Stephen watched a week ago. I thought it was incredible, and I loved that he said that, is it Paramount who did it? I can't remember which major studio, but they basically hid all those documentary tapes because they were worried that people would think Jim Carrey was an asshole, or asshole, as they would say.
Yeah.
So I thought that was brilliant because, I mean, in terms of metaphysics, it's mind blowing, and I do understand what he went through. I understand that immersive process. I remember I was in a show over Christmas um, where we did 62 shows in 5 weeks, and we were on a three-show day on a Saturday. It was, one of those Christmas, they call them pantomimes in England, but they're like a Christmas show. They're like the most popular thing, so they get a lot of people coming. And I had this migraine, and I never had a migraine in my life, and my head was on fire. Every time I walked out on stage, in the character, it was gone. And I was like, how the hell does this work? And I've had really shamanic experiences with performance. Um, to me, I think performance was shamanic, and that was why I was so interested. So I think he's a really interesting example right now because he really pushes the edge and he's not fucking around. Like, that viral video that went out of him talking to a woman outside of fashion. I mean,
Yeah.
it was like when night met day and did not, bless her, I get it. She just didn't know what the hell was going on. She was totally in the programming of what this is supposed to be and did not know how to connect with him or how to bring it back. So that was fascinating, and he didn't care. Um, so I think in a way it's perfect because he's such a visible figure, that if he's really willing to not care about what people think of him because he's gone through his whole life having to work on that. So he's kind of a really interesting symbol to me of this whole period of awakening. And I remember he did some beautiful videos a few years ago that I saw, like a speech he gave for graduates. And he was, yeah, it was very moving. So I'm enjoying this out there phase that he's in as a watcher, because I'm not as identity removed as he is at this point in my life, so I can't say I feel the same way as him. But I love watching him in action and hearing some of the truths that come out of him that I really identify with. And I just love the unbridled nature of it. And it's also a really good two fingers up to what success is supposed to be, because, you know, in polite society, Jim Carrey should just now go away or make a film every 3 years, and we're all happy he's in his mansion and he gave us all this pleasure and we've got all his DVDs, but he's had his time now. He now needs to go to his grave as a celebrated star. And I'm like, good for him. He's not playing that game. He's human and he's having a life and he's had an experience in a very unique system and a very unique position in the world. And now he's going, and this is who I am now. And people are freaking out about it because he's not, you know, God Almighty or whatever, Bruce Almighty, you know, whoever people have decided he is. So he's really playing with people's minds without, I don't think he's trying to, I think he's just being him. That's my take.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I really liked in the documentary where he, and if you look at the documentary, and he says that every movie, I can tell you how it reflected, you know, that point in my life. And you look at his movies, you know, The Mask, pulling off the mask, Bruce Almighty, being God, the Truman Show, everybody want, like, just, and they're all takes that you can relate on going through. And I can say, you know, I've done the work, and, you know, I say done the work because you do the work, and then I also read some things and very high level teachings where it's like, just let go of the ego, you know, there doesn't need to be any work. And I was just like, I believe that. It's just like, but why am I doing all this work to, like, let go of Matt's ego, you know? And I totally get it. I wish I could be removed, and I can recognize that level of mastery. And I think it's a really good segue because, you know, for me, there's the three most influential people in the world are actors, athletes, musicians. Maybe I'm missing, but that's where I'm at. And the reason why that I did Zen Athlete is that my podcast is all on consciousness and things like that. I just need one or two pro athletes to say mental training is good. And now overnight, we've got millions of kids meditating. We can set up a system for them, and this is stuff they can apply to their lives. Jim Carrey, with such a huge audience, is sharing this stuff. And so this kind of goes into, you know, the conscious media, and we're both going to be at the Conscious Media Festival, and you create conscious media. I create conscious media. And even you could say what the definition of conscious media, I don't know. For me, it's just something that comes from you, that's not trying to be cool, that's trying to be of service or express yourself in the way that you authentically want to express yourself. So maybe you can touch a little bit on conscious media, maybe something that you'll talk about, or when we spoke before about giving people the courage to start creating, because we are creators and we just have new platforms. It's just you have this idea of creating, you know, and it's sucking. And like last podcast, I said the wrong name. And I didn't get that. I was like, oh, Kevin, I was like, what happened live? I was like, oh my God. And like, it was fine. And I'm going through the podcast, trying not to beat myself up, and it's fine. And then it'll come back. And then I'm in the car and I'm just like, boom, F-bomb, you know, the anchor comes in. Like, what are you doing? But it's a part of it, and it's okay too, you know? So, you know, just to encourage people to express, because we are creators and we're obviously imperfect.
Well, you've just tapped on something that goes back to the Jim Carrey documentary, which, by the way, is on Netflix if you haven't checked it out. What's it called? Jim and Andy?
Jim and Andy. Yeah, Jim
Yeah,
and Andy.
it's fantastic.
Yep.
And it's all about the making of the movie The Man on the Moon, which I still haven't seen. I should go and watch that. But what you're really talking about is being real. And isn't it interesting that that documentary was suppressed for 20 years because the executives didn't want to show what was really going on behind the scenes in case it damaged the public's relationship to their product, which they had invested money in, and they wanted money back at the box office. Now, I'm a bit of a box office nerd. It's one of my nerd outs. It's one of my, I've got a thing about numbers. So there's a website called Box Office Mojo, and I check it like 3 times a week. Because I just can't help myself. I'm kind of interested. I'm like, how did it do? What did it cost? Did it profit? Did it lose? And of course, part of creating conscious media is I have to figure that stuff out. I think people know you for being on camera or on the podcast, but the truth is, it's mostly chop wood, carry water behind the scenes and figure out the elements, the budgets, the things that are needed to make all of this happen behind the scenes. So really what you're pointing to about the whole, okay, I got someone's name wrong, is no editing. I think we're in a phase of time where things that were previously edited, packaged to us, like you mentioned, the media was all controlled. It was certain newspapers, certain TV channels, and that was it. Everything was filtered to us. Whereas now, thanks to the internet, it's this mass of everything. So, yeah, I think that really kind of segues back to the documentary, and how the documentary, I bet if I do watch Man in the Moon, I'll enjoy it 10% as much as I do. Knowing me, I'll probably get through the first 15-20 minutes, but I loved the behind the scenes. So, Conscious Media Festival, what am I doing there? I don't know. And that's kind of normal for me, because we're 3 months, 4 months away, so I don't need to know the details. But what I do know is I'm really good friends with Regina Meredith, who I love, and we were both at the Conscious, we were both appearing there, and then she suggested she and I work together. So I believe she's gonna interview me in channel mode, which is not something I would do for anybody, but I love her and I trust her, and she's so good with channeling. She really knows the right questions to ask. So I think part of it, she wants to talk to the Z's about new solutions, new ways of being in the coming years, which I think will be an interesting aspect. And then for me, probably really what I'm going to talk about is the path of being the creator. So one thing I've got next year that we're just about to announce, I think we'll open booking on January the 3rd. I've been sitting on this training for 2 years and it's finally ready to come out, and it's going to be called Impact the World: How Creatives, Change Makers and Entrepreneurs Become Who They Are Here to Be. It's going to be in San Diego for 5 days live, and then I'm going to do 2 months of follow-up calls every 2 weeks with all the participants, so that we can just do more Q&A around people's implementation of everything that I've taught and downloaded to them on the course. And the course really is two things. It's the front face of what we do. So, okay, you're somebody who feels like you have a message, you kind of know what you want to do, and you're thinking about it, but you're not sure of the name, you're not sure of the direction, you've never done a video before. We're going to look at all of those front-facing things. Equally, you might be somebody who's got a 6-figure business, but you feel like you need to go somewhere else with what you're doing, and there are some other elements you want to add. But the other side of it for me is giving equal time and weight to the part of us that goes, I don't need to do this because Elizabeth Gilbert's already doing it. Or, well, Tony Robbins is doing what I do, and there's already him, so why would I do this? And I can totally process the hell out of you on all of that stuff in a very nice way, but in a way that will get you back to the part of you that needs to say yes and not no. And there are so many aspects around creating the media for the world that I love talking about and I love teaching people. But really, more than anything, I'm really passionate about seeing people get activated into what they're doing in the world. And because I've got 14 years experience of it personally and working as a transformation guide with people, I now feel really ready and excited about teaching this. So I think I'll be bringing some of that energy and some of those tools, learnings, inspirations to Austin. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to your course. I'm glad you're sitting on it for 2 years. My good friend Crystal, she's a channeler too. She was on the podcast a couple times, and she's a spectacular human being. I've seen her do things in real life that people would think is out of Star Trek, with intuitive abilities that I've never seen anyone else do. So she's sitting on stuff, and it's almost like that energy or that ability to connect with spirit, or this is, one of the things I consistently hear in the books that I read, whether it's autobiography of a yogi or anything else, it's when we activate that next dimension, the multidimensional self, as in when you channel, there's frequencies up there, there's information, or the Akashic records or whatever. And one of the ways it's put is that you have access to all information of the entire whole. So if you want to learn martial arts and you're in a street fight, then you can tune into Matt, and Matt will help you. But at that point, you probably won't be fighting someone else, but you have access to that information and that wisdom. And so it seems like higher level knowledge is coming in. And as this overload comes in, it's equally important to do the work to connect with your heart, knowing that you don't need to read any books, you don't need to do any courses, you don't need to do any of that. Just do what you're inspired to do, and they help. It's both and. So because there's so much, if it resonates and that's where you are with it and it feels good, and you're going to find the right person, coming in from a green person never doing anything, walking to your seminar, it's going to be like a rocket. And that's going to allow people to accelerate, because then you can put your video on YouTube, and then it's out there, and then you can share it, and maybe it goes viral or whatever, or maybe it doesn't, but you're creating what you want to create. So it's I'm excited to see what you have to bring, and I think it's going to be extremely valuable. I'm excited to be in Austin too, to be with you, Regina. I only met her briefly, but she was so beautiful and warm, and I got a really good hug in there, so yeah. I'm excited to see you guys as well. I think it's going to be a great time, and that community is very supportive, right? She's worked really hard. That woman works her butt off, and when I first saw her interview, I realized how much I sucked compared to her. I was like, I'm doing pretty good, and I watched, I was like, whoa, like, that's another level. That's really good. So, so I really admire her style and her work ethic and all that stuff.
If I may, I think you're great. And number two, and that's not just me kind of blowing smoke because you brought it up. I mean that truly. And it's funny because I've got a couple of guest speakers at the Impact the World training, and one of them is Regina. I've asked Regina to do a section called The Art of the Interview. And when I first proposed it to her, she said, well, you can't really teach it. It's just a connection. And I was like, oh, you can. Not because I said, even that line, Regina, is key. Even people understanding that. So she's going to do about 75 minutes of presenting her kind of top tips for interviewing, giving some examples of when they go well and when they don't, and how to kind of deal with it, and then answer students' questions there and then. So I just want to throw that at you, that she would argue that you're doing great, because I know what she would say if she was sitting here right now. And I think also for me, what Regina brings, as well as her own personal wisdom and her heart and her love and her very high vibe frequency, I love that she bridges time for us too, because she's been doing this for a while, and she was a newscaster in the 70s. So I really love that she has a kind of knowledge and an understanding of how this has all been playing out in the last 30, 40 years, and yet she brings such a fresh thing to it. So that to me is so valuable. And even though she's still very sprightly and young in herself and in her human body, she actually has really been doing it for a long time. So that I always think that the energetics of a person is key. Like when you told me at the beginning of the call, you're like, oh, I do martial arts. My first thought was, oh, whenever I'm in the same place as him for a day or two, I'd love to do a lesson with you on martial arts, because I know, because it's you, your frequency would elevate me really fast. Because the frequency of a person's ability or a person's mastery, if you're open, you can dance with very quickly if you know how to just be in that energy field. So that's two things I'm saying, really. One is I'd like to book you for a martial art lesson, and two, I think Regina just brings, I think she brings more than she even realizes to the table. And I always tell her how much respect there is for her out in the world, because I hear it all the time. And I think it's really important she's celebrated, especially as I think women don't tend to be in the way that men are, or men will go after that celebration and women will do it in a more quiet way. So I'm always thrilled when I see her being celebrated.
Amazing. Well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate that feedback. And yeah, the lesson for sure. I would love to. It's one of the things I can do is I'm a really good teacher, snowboarding, martial arts, consciousness. It's, because I just take it all in. I'm always, whatever it is, I want to learn it. Right. And that's the podcast too is these people that I respect and I want to learn more from. Well, then I get an hour and a half of your time to speak honestly about, life and what's going on, and I'm growing, and so then you can share those abilities with someone else, and because you want them to succeed, you want them to have that joy. So it'd be an honor to share that with you anytime, man. And it's a small world, so I can definitely see it happening.
Definitely. Can I say one thing? And this is
Of
really
course.
important because, we're talking about the parts of our minds that stop us doing things. Oh, are we good enough? Are we a good enough interviewer? I bet you everyone listening, or most people listening who are feeling based, will agree with me that it's the same reaction I've had to you. Being on air with you or listening to you on air is like getting a hug from you. I really mean that. It's like there's an energy that comes out of you that is, because I think you're so intentional and you have these intentions, and you really, really are devoted to what you're doing. And that really comes across. So, you could sit there and read the Bible for all I care. I would still feel that Matt Belair energy coming either into the audio or through the video. And I think that is something that we were never trained to understand or acknowledge, that we now have to understand and acknowledge. The Z's said to me several times on days where I did not want to get on camera and film my energy updates, my monthly things, I'd either be having a rough day, or I didn't think they would be like, or I wouldn't think I had anything. And of course, the irony is I never have a message before I turn the button on anyway. So but I just wouldn't feel, and they would say, just get on camera. They would say they're not looking for your information. They're just happy to see that you're still alive with them down on the planet. And it really hit me. I was like, oh my God, because I knew that was true. And I was like, wow, really? So it's just, and it's that old adage, just show up. The rest takes care of itself, but just be willing and find the resources and the timing to show up. So I just wanted to throw that at you.
Man, well, I appreciate you, and thank you so much. I graciously appreciate everything you're saying. It means a lot, and yeah, it means a lot. And even within myself to sometimes make a joke and demean yourself for something that you work on. It's old programming, that I'm still working through. Is just letting it go. So like to hear that is received and really appreciated. So thank you, man.
Yeah.
I could sit here and talk to you all day. I know that you have some other things to do now. I said this at the beginning of the show. If there's anything that you wish that I had asked, or anything that the show brought up, the floor is yours. I'll sit here and I'll enjoy for as long as you want to wrap. And if you just want to leave the listeners with final thoughts, I'm open to any of those options. But it's been a real treat, man, to get to know you and chat.
It's been a real pleasure, and I'm really excited to meet you in person. And I will hunt you down for that martial arts lesson, because I'm a complete beginner, so I've never done it before. So I feel full trust in doing that with you. Yeah, no, the only thing I would say is to anyone listening or watching that, if you're still listening or watching, then I'm really jazzed about the Austin Conscious Media Festival. I think it's going to be amazing, and I just feel a lot of great energy around it, and not just the actual 3-day event itself, but what it's going to seed and birth in the years to come. Like you said, there were people who have become lifelong friends for you, and I really feel that. It feels like a melting pot of people who are coming together to reconnect, reactivate themselves, activate themselves, and do some beautiful and much needed work on the planet in the coming years. And the only thing I would say is, you can get my free videos. If you sign up for my newsletter at leeharrisenergy.com, there are free videos that come out at least every month, if not more often. We often have special offers on things, keep you up to date in all my events. And the one big thing I'm doing at the end of the year is a 7-day online event called Rebirth 2018. On December the 28th, I'm going to do a 90-minute live broadcast, which will be me speaking about the energies of what we've just walked through in 2017 and what's coming up in 2018. I will also be channeling the Z's on those topics and starting a process with you on December the 28th of alchemizing and integrating everything that you've been through this past year, ready to, on January the 3rd, on the final live broadcast of the 7 days, to intend for your year ahead. And in the 5 days in between, we're going to have audio and video content for you that isn't live, that's pre-recorded. So for anyone who wants to take that rebirth journey, it's called Rebirth 2018. It's a very conscious, intentional activation process across 7 days, across the new year. And all details are at my website, leeharrisenergy.com.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that sounds exciting. I might sign up for that. I have to check it out. That's really good. I think that when we're moving into the new year, it's important to just reflect, and I like the fact that you're integrating too, because we can kind of, we just want to put it behind us. It's like, no, make peace with it, understand it, alchemize it, bring it in as a part of you, and now use that as your fuel to move forward. So I think there's going to be tremendous value. So I might have to check that out.
Yeah, intention and release are the two core components of all my live workshops, and we're bringing live workshops to Portland, Santa Fe, Costa Rica, North Carolina, the Omega Center next year, as well as Impact the World, which will be at the end of April in San Diego. And yeah, I'm a big believer in you've got to have the two. You've got to let the two rub up against each other and feed each other. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I've done that kind of work in a one-night live workshop at various countries around the world over the years. And this year, I'm glad that wherever you are in the world, you can take that workshop, and it gave me the opportunity to do it across 7 days. So yeah, we've had a really lovely group of people and a large number of people signing up for it. So that's fantastic. So it's gonna have some charge.
Yeah, amazing. Well, man, Lee, so great to meet you. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for committing to the path and continuously growing and refining and just contributing and being authentic. It's beautiful to see, and I honor your work and I honor you. So thanks for coming on and sharing it with everybody.
Thank you, and likewise to you and to all of the listeners and viewers that I'm sure are the same, but we just can't, we can only hear you through the ethers. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Matt, for having me.
My pleasure. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We love you. We'll see you in the next one.
Big love.